Hello, my name is Andy King, and it is my pleasure to talk to you about Dame Ethel Smythe and her charming one-act dance dream opera, Fate Gallant. Before discussing Fate Gallant specifically, I would like to share with you a little biographical background to this extraordinary woman. The composer, activist for women's rights, and writer Ethel Mary Smythe was born in 1858, the fourth of 8 children, to an upper middle class military family in Sidcup, Kent, now absorbed into the London borough of Bexley. Like many genteel young ladies of the time, she was educated first at home and then at boarding school. Social conventions of the time considered that a woman's place was in the home. However, following initial musical instruction in harmony with, amongst others, the Scottish composer Alexander Ewing, in 1877, at the tender age of 19, she entered the Leipzig Conservatory to study composition. In defying her father and hitching up her skirts to head to Germany to begin life as a decadent artiste, Smythe perhaps gave the first major indication that she was not the kind of young lady who was satisfied to stay at home with little more than her crochet hooks and needlepoint. Indeed, the staggering resilience and force of will required to follow her natural instincts at so oppressive a time for women make it no surprise that she would later become heavily connected to the woman's suffrage movement. At Leipzig, her teachers included Karl Reinecker, Salomon Jadassohn, and Louis Maas, but disappointed by both staff and students, Smythe left the conservatory after only a year. Buoyed, however, by encouragement from sympathetic friends and acquaintances, including Brahms, Grieg, Joachim, Tchaikovsky, and Clara Schumann, and no doubt propelled by her own indefatigable energy, she remained in Germany for well over a decade. Her early compositions, predominantly songs and piano pieces, were frequently given at private recitals, though some public performances of her chamber music include concerts at no less a venue than the Leipzig Gewandhaus. By her early 30s, Smythe had returned to England and was beginning to establish her reputation as a composer of orchestral music in London, with both her Serenade and Antony and Cleopatra overture being given at the Crystal Palace in 1890. Following which, and despite favourable reviews, critics of the time were surprised to discover that E. M. Smythe was a woman. Women were central to both Smythe's work and her personal life. She made no secret of her physical attraction to women, and the influence of her passionate liaisons and feminist leanings can be heard throughout her music, particularly in her second opera, The Boatswain's Mate. Writing in 1912 to her philosopher friend and collaborator Henry Bennett Brewster, who may have been her only male lover, she expressed puzzlement. "I wonder why it is so much easier for me to love my own sex more passionately than yours. I can't make it out, for I am a very healthy-minded person." 2 years earlier, in 1910, Smythe had met the political activist for women's rights Emmeline Pankhurst, with whom she became great friends and subsequently joined the Women's Social and Political Union, commencing 2 years of dedication to the women's suffrage campaign. Amongst her musical contributions to the movement are the Songs of Sunrise for chorus and optional orchestra. Its final movement, the March of the Women, with words by Cecily Hamilton, became the official anthem of the Union, with one particular performance from 1912 beautifully capturing the unbreakable feminist spirit that prevailed at the time. Following the mass incarceration of women involved in a window-smashing offensive designed to provoke visibility of the suffrage campaign, Smythe, who had taken part and was consequently arrested, was visited in prison by the conductor Sir Thomas Beecham, who reported that he found the women in the courtyard, marching round it and singing lustily their war chant, while the composer, beaming approbation from an overlooking upper window, beat in time in almost Bacchic frenzy with a toothbrush. Following her time of particular devotion to the suffrage cause, Smythe eventually returned to her musical career with renewed zeal, and new compositions included 3 further operas, a concerto for violin, horn and orchestra, as well as her last large-scale work, an oratorio, The Prison. Sadly, increasing hearing loss towards the end of her life curtailed musical activity, and Smythe was forced to abandon composition. Here again, however, an innate resilience allowed her to develop a secondary career as a prolific writer of memoirs, biographical sketches, and essays, ultimately publishing 10 books. But despite her reputation as an activist, it was her music that brought her significant acclaim, and she was created a dame in 1922, receiving the first ever damehood awarded for music composition. Turning our attention to Smythe's dramatic works and Fate Gallant specifically, it is important to note that it was in the field of opera that she had always intended to make her mark. While still a relatively young lady of 34, in 1892 she composed her first opera, Fantasio, to a libretto by herself and her friend Brewster after a play by Musset. Securing performances was difficult, and Fantasio was not performed until 1898 when it was staged in Weimar. Undeterred by the setbacks of being both taken seriously as a female composer and the struggle to arrange productions of her dramatic works, Smythe composed 5 further operas, predominantly in one act. In chronological order, they are Der Wald, The Wreckers, ambitiously presented at the Bard Festival in 2015, The Boatswain's Mate, Fate Gallant, and Entente Cordiale. As explored by Dr. Sophie Fuller, each of Smythe's 6 operas is sharply distinguished in form and musical language. Smythe was dissatisfied with Fantasio, feeling that her through-composed score contained too much passion and violence for the comic libretto. In the one-act music drama Der Wald, she was more successful at matching music to the tragic love story. With The Wreckers, she reached the height of her dramatic power, creating a work rich in musical characterization and powerful evocations of the sea. A devotee of Gilbert and Sullivan's work, Indeed, as an undergraduate obsessed with British music, one of my own lecturers described Smythe's Mass in D to me as a cross between Wagner and Gilbert and Sullivan. Smythe often argued that English composers were better suited to writing light rather than grand opera. The Boatswain's Mate, then, the most frequently staged of her operas, is a small-scale comic opera with a deftness of touch in which set vocal pieces, some incorporating English folk songs, and spoken dialogue for the first act, are contrasted with a through-composed second act. Her penultimate opera, Fate Gallant, is described in the score as a dance dream, and is built on a libretto by the composer and Edward Shanks after a story by Maurice Baring. Completed in the early 1920s, it is the only one of Smythe's 6 operas to be written to a commission, and it was premiered at the Birmingham Repertory Theatre on the 4th of June 1923 by the British National Opera Company, having been recently founded by Smythe champion Sir Thomas Beecham. The work was a success, and a week later the production was reprised at Covent Garden, prompting Smythe to confidently confide to her diary on the 18th of July 1923, "I know the public loved F.G." Furthermore, the popular opera star Astra Desmond wrote to the composer, "How tremendously I enjoyed your exquisite Fate Gallant. It is one of the most beautiful and moving things I have seen or heard." 2 years later, the work was revived in a student production at the Royal College of Music in London, in conjunction with the premiere of her final opera, Entente Cordiale. As heard in the brief extract at the beginning of this talk, the music is refined, evoking the moonlit Watteau garden of the action. The score exploits old dance forms, reflecting the neoclassicism inherent in Baring's story, which draws upon the familiar figures of the Commedia dell'arte, including Pierrot, Columbine, Harlequin, and Pantaloon. The plot runs as follows. There is a Fate Gallant in the Royal Gardens, part of the entertainment being a puppet play by the king's servants. Later on, Pierrot, who though Columbine is his mistress secretly loves the queen, is witness of a secret meeting between her and her exiled lover, who is wearing a Pierrot disguise. At the sound of his warning voice, the lover flies, but Columbine also has seen the meeting. Mistaking the lover for the real Pierrot, mad with jealousy, she informs the king. The king at once guesses the truth, but in order to save the queen's honour, Pierrot insists that he himself was the culprit, the whole thing being a jester's prank. Undeceived, but furious, the king bids his guard hang him on a branch hard by, whereupon Pierrot stabs himself, and Columbine, realizing what she has done, swoons beside his lifeless body. Musically, the opera draws heavily on stylized 18th century dance forms, but Smythe also reflects on the Renaissance, incorporating an a cappella, that is, unaccompanied, setting of an early 17th century poem attributed to William Herbert, Soul's Joy, in the style of a madrigal.
Soul's joy, now I am gone, and human joy which cannot be, and human hope which cannot be, since I must leave myself with thee, and carry thee with me. Yet when unto our hearts denies each other's sight, and makes to us a constant night, makes to us a constant night, when love is changed to light. Oh, give way to no grief, but let beneath of future
In addition to being a first-rate artist, Smythe was a canny businesswoman and happy to adapt her operatic works to suit the instrumental forces available, thereby increasing opportunities for performance. At the Bard Festival, the larger of her Fate Gallant orchestrations is heard, incorporating single woodwind, two horns, trumpet, trombone, timpani, percussion, optional harp, and strings, together with a modest on-stage ensemble. Over the years, Smythe enthusiasts have enjoyed a range of orchestral, choral, and chamber music recording projects that have explored her work. But following the 1995 release of the BBC Proms performance of The Wreckers from the previous summer, it is only within the last decade that her operas have really been placed under the microscope. Having already released The Boatswain's Mate and Fate Gallant, as well as reissuing The Wreckers, the British charity and record label Retrospect Opera are now on the hunt to find the lost manuscript of Entente Cordiale. I hope you have enjoyed this talk and that you enjoy the Bard Festival's performance of Smythe's Fate Gallant. I also hope that you may now be inspired to explore more of this extraordinary woman's music. Thank you for listening.